Hello and welcome to the One Mind Dharma podcast. My name is Matthew Sokolov, and if you want to learn more about us, you can visit oneminddharma.com. All the podcast episodes are up at oneminddharma.com/podcasts. If you're interested in individual sessions to deepen your mindfulness practice, or your Buddhist practice, or you simply want to bring mindfulness and compassion to your daily life, or perhaps something you're struggling with, you can visit oneminddharma.com/coach. We have a free sitting group that's starting up in the new year in January 2025. It'll be a monthly group, completely free. All the registration and info is at oneminddharma.com/group. And last but not least, if you're listening to this when it comes out, I am teaching an online 6-week course directed towards beginners, but I think suitable for anyone, with the Drala Mountain Center, formerly the Shambhala Center in Colorado. And that'll be online. We'll kind of go through the basics of mindfulness practice as well as bringing mindfulness to daily life. It's heavily inspired by my first book, Practicing Mindfulness. And all the information there is on oneminddharma.com/6, and that's the number 6. Not written out. And then the last kind of piece of housekeeping I want to say before getting into the talk is that we do have a new dog to our household. We rescued a dog last week here from a local shelter, and she's lovely, but she does bark sometimes. We're still working on that with her, so I apologize and ask forgiveness in advance if you hear. She's a large dog. It's a loud bark. She's in another room, but she may bark. So I ask for forgiveness ahead of time for that. So we've spent the last couple talks and kind of topics we've been going through have been more general topics or things that are going on for me or with my students. And I wanted to kind of bring it back to some core Buddhist teachings. So I decided to talk about something that the Satipattha, the Foundations of Mindfulness, that is really kind of integral to practice. I thought about discussing the Four Noble Truths, but that's discussed a lot, and there's a lot of information out there, as there is with the Satipattha. But I think that the Foundations of Mindfulness are something maybe a little bit less discussed or less introductory as well than the Four Noble Truths. This is going to be a rather dense or dry talk. I don't think it's uninteresting. I really find the suttas and the practices and what the Buddha actually recommended we do quite interesting. But it is going to be a little bit of a dense or dry talk. So let's jump into it with that lovely introduction. The Satipattha is like one of the most foundational practices, if not probably one of the most important suttas in the insight meditation tradition. It's really the instructions on how to practice mindfulness. If this is, I'll include a bunch of resources at the end, but if this is something that interests you and you want to dive deeper, I highly recommend the Satipattha book, Satipattha, The Direct Path to Realization by Bhikkhu Analayo. He's a monk who was, I believe, born in Germany, a Sri Lankan monk who actually did his PhD thesis on this sutta, on the Satipattha. And so he's a monk and a scholar of the Pali language. And his thesis that he put together and worked for years on actually became the book Satipattha, The Direct Path to Realization. I consider it, as many do, as kind of one of the most authoritative English language takes on the Satipattha. So I'll source a bunch from that, and then I'm sourcing as well a lot from Thanissaro Bhikkhu of Wat Metta, who is at the forefront of Pali to English translation, another monk scholar. And I like both of these monks because they don't just have an understanding of the Pali language and just are translating it. They're also monks who are practicing and using a bit of their understanding of Dharma to translate and make these teachings available to us in English. So the Satipatthana, just a little background before we get into the foundations and the first foundation. And today we're just going to talk about one of them, and then in other talks we'll talk about the other ones. The Satipatthana is believed by most scholars to have been compiled from other suttas around the year 20 BCE. So it actually isn't believed to be like a direct talk that the Buddha gave, but a compilation. Bhikkhu Analayo, the mentioned monk who wrote the book and the PhD thesis, says that the words or the etymology is sati and upatana. And I talked about what sati is on this podcast before. I've talked about it in my teachings kind of relentlessly. It's the word that we translate as mindfulness. Now, the actual word sati means to remember to observe. We just translate it into English as mindfulness. So there's this quality of mindfulness, or sati, that is remembering to observe. And then upatana, which means presence. So the ways that it's often translated into English, Ton Jeff says the 4 ways to arouse mindfulness, the 4 establishments of mindfulness, or 4 ways to establish mindfulness, or the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is not the most accurate translation, but it's how it was introduced to me. It's how I heard it for years, so it is just what I call it. And the 4 foundations of mindfulness at their simplest are 4 ways we can establish mindfulness, 4 ways we can cultivate mindfulness to hopefully lead to an eventual awakening. In the Pali commentaries, so kind of the teachings that came after the suttas and monks that were commenting on it, the 4 foundations are part of what's called the Bodhipakkhya. The Bodhipakkhya Dhamma are these sets of qualities that are, when perfected, lead to awakening. So it's an important teaching. Thich Nhat Hanh, in his book, The Heart of the Buddha's Teachings, says, the 4 establishments of mindfulness are the foundation of our dwelling place. Without them, our house is abandoned. No one is sweeping, dusting, or tidying up. Our body becomes unkempt, our feelings full of suffering, and our mind a heap of afflictions. When we are truly home, our body, mind, and feelings will be a place of refuge for ourselves and for others. These foundations of mindfulness are really the core of the Buddha's teachings on mindfulness. In the sutta, and when the foundations of mindfulness are talked about, they're referred to by a Pali word, ekayano. Bhikkhu Analayo translates this as the direct path. Somatera, who's a monk from Sri Lanka, translates it as the only path. So that's where the name of the book comes from, Satipatthana, the direct path to enlightenment or to awakening. In the sutta itself, at the beginning, it says, "This is the only way, monks, for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the destruction of suffering and grief, for reaching the right path, for the attainment of nirvana, namely the 4 foundations of mindfulness." So again, Ton Jeff here is translating it as it's the only way. Analayo translates it as it's the direct path. But there's some emphasis there. That's not written in many suttas or any other suttas. This is the direct path to awakening. In the Kulavadela Sutta, which is a set of questions and answers to the Buddha, the Satipatthanas are taught as the basis for samadhi, or concentration, and jhanas. So this practice is both important as a standalone and can lead to direct awakening, and it helps support other practices. And there's 4. I'm going to introduce just the 4 today, and then we're going to talk about the first one. The first one is the body, mindfulness of the body. The second one is Vedana, or feeling tone. The third is Chitta, or mind. And the fourth is the Dhammas, or Dharmas. And we'll get into all of those and how they work together. I do think that they don't necessarily need to be as linear of a path as they're always taught, but they do work well as that. But we're going to start today with just the first foundation of mindfulness, Kaya, or body, Kayanupassana. This is actually often taught what the Buddha was working with during enlightenment, when he became enlightened, when he sat under that Bodhi tree, was he was working with mindfulness of the body and breath. So we're going to kind of work our way through the sutta. I'm not going to read the entire sutta. I will include a link at the end to the sutta I'm sourcing from. It's through Access to Insight. But it starts with, "Herein, monks, a monk having gone to the forest, to the foot of a tree, or to an empty place, sits down with his legs crossed, keeps his body erect and his mindfulness alert." This is an instruction offered here. It's offered a few other places in the suttas. I believe the Anapanasati, the mindfulness of breathing sutta, starts with this instruction. But I think this is something that shouldn't be passed up, that there's a recommendation to sit at the foot of a tree or to an empty place. So some level of sitting somewhere quiet and peaceful, sitting down with legs crossed, keeping the body erect and mindfulness alert. So encouraging this correct posture and inviting energy into our meditation. Often when I lead a guided meditation, I'll start with the instruction to imagine kind of energizing the skeleton, but relaxing the muscles around it. This may be more possible for some than for others, of course. So you sit or meditate in a way that feels conducive to awakening, that brings energy and is conducive to mindfulness. And of course, we all can't go find a tree to sit under in a quiet place, but we can find somewhere relatively quiet or relatively conducive to seeing clearly. So as we move into mindfulness of the body, there's 6 different things offered in this section. It's the biggest section. But I just want to point out that we're being called to view the body as it is, the actual experience of it. Jeff in his commentaries encourages us to view the body on its own terms, rather than terms of its function in the context of the world. To view the body on its own terms, rather than terms of its function in the context of the world. So sensing the body without reference, without judging, without wandering off into our thoughts about it, without comparing, just sensing the actual body. So the first way the Buddha tells us to practice mindfulness of the body is mindfulness of the breath. Let's start by just reading a bit from the sutta. Mindful, and I'll actually pause there. I realize the language is not inclusive. The Buddha wrote pretty much everything, or the suttas are written with the pronoun he. I'm going to read it as it's written and been translated by Jeff, and I realize that's not inclusive. You can substitute she, they, whatever pronoun you'd like. But I am going to read it as it's been translated. Mindful he breathes in, and mindful he breathes out. He, thinking, I breathe in long, he understands when he's breathing in long. Or thinking I breathe out long, he understands when he's breathing out long. Or thinking I breathe in short, he understands when he's breathing in short. Or thinking I breathe out short, he understands when he's breathing out short. that's your first introduction to a sutta, a lot of them are that repetitive. They don't really shorten them very much. And then the second paragraph says, experiencing the whole body I shall breathe in, thus thinking thus he trains himself. Experiencing the whole body I shall breathe out, thinking thus he trains himself. Calming the activity of the body I shall breathe in, thinking thus he trains himself. Calming the activity of the body I shall breathe out, thinking thus he trains himself. So this is, there's kind of 4 instructions here. It's kind of the first tetrad of the Anapanasati, if you're familiar with that, the developing mindfulness of the breath. It's to breathe in and out, to notice long and short breaths, to feel the whole body as you breathe, and to calm the body as you breathe. So one of the things that's nice about this part of the sutta is it's literally meditation instructions. Pretty clear right there, right? We can sit and pause and breathe, find a quiet place, and just follow those instructions. Start with just noticing the in-breath and out-breath. Notice if the breath is long or short. Is it a long inhale or short inhale? Is it a long exhale or a short exhale? And then with a little bit of effort, we can get a sense of the whole body breathing. The movement not just at the nose or at the chest as we breathe, but kind of, we may feel like the physical sensations of the shoulders moving ever so slightly. Maybe even at the lower back and hips. Getting the sense of the whole body breathing. And then calming the body with each breath. This invitation to fall into some calmness or gentleness. And you can try this with a guided meditation or on your own. There's just 4 steps: in and out, long and or short, the whole body, breathing with the whole body, and then breathing in a way that calms the body. We can return to the breath as many times as necessary when we do this. Whenever the mind wanders off, just gently bringing it back to the breath. And the encouragement is to feel the actual physical sensations. So not our thoughts about them, not our judgments, not needing to change anything, but just resting our awareness on the breath and placing it there gently. As with other practices in the Four Foundations, we can practice this. We're being called to practice this in formal sitting meditation. But we can also do this during the day when you're walking to the bus or walking around your home. Practice some mindfulness of the breath. It's a great tool. The breath is always with us and always there and always changing. The second section on mindfulness of the body is mindfulness of postures. It reads, when he is going, a bhikkhu understands I am going. When he is standing, he understands I am standing. When he sits, he understands I am sitting. And when he's lying down, he understands I am lying down. Or just as his body is disposed, so he understands it. So again, I find this one to be relatively clear. Know the posture of your body. There's 4 named in the sutta: moving, standing, sitting, and lying down. One could argue that there's other postures of the body. Maybe you're doing a handstand. Running, I guess, is a form of moving. But I find this to be a really important and often overlooked piece of the practice. It's why if you go to a monastery or go on retreat, walking meditation will absolutely be a part of your practice. Yet many of us don't ever practice walking meditation at home. The encouragement from the Buddha and in the monastic community is to practice in any position we're in. So even as you're sitting there's a great book, The Manual of Insight by Mahasi Sayadaw. It's a very dense book, but he goes through his teaching or way of practicing really the Four Foundations. And one of the things that his instructions, and I've used it in some guided meditations, as well as I use it regularly in my own practice, is I notice and note the inhale and exhale, in, out, and then I note my posture, sitting, in, out, sitting, just to bring mindfulness to this posture of the body. It helps me bring attention to my butt sitting in the chair, or my hands on the lap, or the position of my back. Another good way to do it is kind of to use an awareness trigger, which is not from the suttas, but something actually a therapist gave me many years ago. That every time you change posture kind of dramatically, try to bring mindfulness to it. So, for example, right now I'm seated recording this talk, and when I'm done and I click the button to end the talk, I'll probably save it, and then the first thing I do almost every single time is I stand up and stretch a little bit. So in that period of moving from sitting to standing, to really bring some mindfulness to it, to tune into how it feels and all the different parts of the body moving and the body as a whole moving. There's no right or wrong answer. There's nothing we're looking to make happen. You're just tuning into your direct experience of the posture of the body. And you can, of course, use it when you're walking, when you go to lie down in bed at night, when you shower. Notice the posture, the movements of the body. All right, the third one is clear comprehension, which I think is one that is a little bit abstract at first glance. But it is important, and I think can lead to some great insight. The sutta reads, "Further, monks, a monk in going forward and back applies clear comprehension. In looking straight on and looking away, he applies clear comprehension. In bending and in stretching, he applies clear comprehension. In wearing robes and carrying the bowl, he applies clear comprehension. In eating, drinking, chewing, and savoring, he applies clear comprehension. In walking and standing and sitting and falling asleep, in waking and speaking, and in keeping silence, he applies clear comprehension." So basically applying clear comprehension all the time to the body. Great. What is clear comprehension? Is a reasonable next question. It's broken up into 4 things. Purpose. So what is the purpose of this movement of the body? Why do we want to, using the sutta, go forward or back? Or why do we want to look straight on and look away? Or what's the purpose of eating, drinking, chewing? Again, going back to Mahasi Sayadaw's Manual of Insight, one of the things that he has his students practice with is, let's say you're sitting in meditation and you have an itch on your face. You might notice the itch, the felt sensation, and then really try to notice the intention. Oh, I have the intention, that's unpleasant, and I have the intention to give it a little scratch to relieve myself. So as you move the hand up to scratch the little itch on your face, tuning into the purpose of that movement. And this isn't to overthink it. It's not necessarily, and we'll talk about this in a bit, but it's not necessarily a place for like a lot of intellect or reflection, but seeing if we can notice a purpose that's right there as we do something with the body. Even as we sit to meditate, we can ask ourselves, what's the intention with my posture of the body? As I just read that, I just uncrossed my legs and sat up straighter because I wanted to bring a little bit more energy and alertness. So we can do this in meditation or out of meditation, checking in with the purpose of the body, of the movements. Is one part of clear comprehension. Then we have suitability. Is this action suitable or inaction? Is it a skillful way to act with the body right now? Is what we're doing with the body helpful or harmful to our awakening or the awakening of others? For example, it may be incredibly appropriate for me to get up and mindfully stretch after this meditation. However, if I'm sitting in the front row at a funeral and I'm feeling a little rigid, it's probably not suitable for me to get up and just stretch. So just checking in. This is kind of the piece of mindfulness of the body that is a little bit more reflective, but again, it's not to get lost in thoughts about it or judging. It's just to recognize. Resort is the third one, which I think can be most easily summarized as, can we bring whatever the body is doing into our practice? Or can we expand our practice to include whatever the body is doing? Or how can we practice with this movement or experience? So we often, if you have a sitting practice, you have some experience sitting and practicing with the body in a sense, while seated. But what about, is there another time during the day that I don't want to use absolutes like this, but rarely have mindfulness? Like I think I used the shower example earlier. Like take a shower and see if you can invite that into your practice to really be mindful of the body. I always have thought this was a little bit of a silly one with clear comprehension, because the answer is yes, we can always make it part of our practice. And then the last part of clear comprehension is recognizing reality, or sometimes it's translated as recognizing non-delusion. So recognizing the three marks of existence in the body, right? Recognizing the impermanent and changing nature, the non-self, the fact that it's always changing and lacks an inherent self, and dukkha, the natural process of clinging and craving and lack of satisfaction in the body. For me in my practice, this piece of clear comprehension, the non-delusion, really rests on just meeting the body as it is, watching out for any clinging or craving or identifying with it that comes up in practice. Okay, so we're just going to go little recap as we're half the way through. We have mindfulness of the breath, mindfulness of the postures of the body, and then clear comprehension, which is just recognizing the purpose, the suitability, the resort, and the non-delusion. The next one is, I think from my understanding, and I do not read Pali, but from my understanding, reading various scholars, the most appropriate translation is the reflections on the repulsiveness of the body. In the US and in the West, it's often called the reflections on the reality of the body. And this practice or instruction is meant to help us detach from the body a bit, to recognize its true nature a bit more, recognize those three marks of existence, the impermanence and not self and dukkha. In the suttas, it's taught as kind of an antidote to desire and lust. So in this meditation practice, we reflect on and bring mindfulness to 31 different parts of the body. And I'm just going to read through them as they're translated by Tanjef. You may find different translations out there. They're kind of grouped based on ancient medical understanding. Here they are. Here are the parts of the body we reflect on. The hair of the head, the hair of the body, the nails, the teeth, and the skin, the flesh, the sinews, the bones, bone marrow, and the kidneys, the heart, the liver, the diaphragm, the spleen, and the lungs, the large intestine, the small intestine, the stomach, the feces, and the brain, the bile, the phlegm, the pus, the blood, the sweat, and the fat, the tears, the grease, the saliva, the mucus, the oil of the joints, and the urine. So this is just a framework for looking at kind of the reality of the body. And it is taught as a way to reflect on the repulsiveness of the body. And I don't think that we need to internalize that, or it's a calling to like internalize it and dislike our bodies, but it is a calling to kind of see our bodies more clearly and become disenchanted a bit by our identification with our bodies. The sutra reads, just as if there were a double-mouthed provision bag, full of various kinds of grains such as hill paddy, green gram, cowpeas, sesamum, and husked rice. A man with sound eyes, having opened that bag, were to take stock of the contents thus. Oh, this is hill paddy, this is green gram, this is cowpea, this is sesamum, this is husked rice. So it's a calling to really look inside and just notice the contents of what these bodies are, to see it clearly. The fifth one, second to last, is the four elements. And in this modern day, it may seem like a bit silly or something, but this is actually one of my favorite meditations on the body. It offers a different viewpoint of the body, or a different kind of lens through which we can look at the body. And I think it also gives some insight into the impermanent and changing nature of the body. So the four elements are wind, water, fire, and earth. You may hear different teachers use different examples or explain them differently. But my understanding is the wind is the air or the breath. So we can sit with mindfulness under our tree in the correct posture for ourselves, noticing these elements, noticing the element of air or wind as the breath moves through us. Again, just tuning in to the direct experience, not our thoughts about them. The element of water, the liquid, the tears, the saliva. The element of fire, or heat in the body, or lack thereof, cold. This is often taught as like the blood moving around the body. Tanjef calls this like breath energy. As we breathe in, we can feel kind of the breath energy throughout the body, the heart pumping, the heat, the fire. And then earth, the physical, our physical bodies. I have a meditation for this on YouTube, the Four Elements meditation. And again, it was something that I was not keen on at first. I thought it was a little woo-woo for me, or like that's not practical, or I had judgments. And I've actually found it to be quite beneficial as I mentioned, like a different lens through which to view the body. And then the last one is the cemetery contemplations. And just like a little bit of a warning, they are a little bit gruesome. Just to give you a heads up. But this is a reflection on the impermanent nature of the body, really. So it reads like this, and then I won't read the whole sutta, I'll read the different sections. Further, monks, if a monk sees a body dead 1, 2, or 3 days, swollen, blue, and festering, thrown in the charnel ground, he then applies this perception to his own body. My body is also of the same nature. Such it will become, and I will not escape it. Because this reflection that our bodies are of the nature to die, to get sick, to experience old age. This reality of impermanence, of not self, of dukkha. So the 9 contemplations are dead 1, 2, or 3 days, swollen, blue, and festering. And we recognize that our body will also become like this. Then it will be eaten by crows, hawks, vultures, dogs, jackals, or different kinds of worms. our bodies of the same nature. Then reduce to a skeleton with some flesh and blood still attached, held together by tendons. Then reduce to a skeleton, blood besmeared and without flesh, held together by tendons. Then reduce to a skeleton without flesh and without blood, held together by tendons. Then reduce to disconnected bones, scattered in all directions. Here a bone of the hand, there a bone of the foot, a shin bone, a thigh bone, the pelvis, spine, and skull. Then reduce to bleached bones of a conch-like color. Then reduce to bones more than a year old, lying in a heap. And finally reduce to bones gone rotten and become dust. My body is of the same nature, such it will become, and I will not escape it. They're really a reflection on death and the nature of our body. It's a tough one for a lot of people at first. I definitely found it uncomfortable when I was sitting in a meditation group and the teacher, Molly, said that's what we're going to do today. And she did it excellently and wonderfully, and we had a great group. But I remember sitting in that meditation and just being like, wow, this is wild. I came here to learn to focus on my breath. And it can be a little bit different or a little bit uncomfortable as we face this reality, right? When Elizabeth was sick last year and with cancer, my wife, my partner, I was meeting with the teacher at the time who said, oh, let's do some death meditation. Let's do some cemetery contemplations. And I remember being like, oh, like I know they're right, but that's not at all what I want to do, because what I'm being faced with right now is the mortality of my partner and partially my own mortality, but the mortality of my partner. I don't want to think about it more. I want to think about it less. And what the teacher had me do was actually really sit with it and come to accept it. The teacher was very cognizant and mindful of where I was at and wasn't, encouraging me to do something that was going to cause trauma or lead me to an unsafe place. And it helped me. And we'll talk about, I actually did the cemetery contemplations for her. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But this practice can help us see the reality of our bodies. So that was the Buddha's teachings. Those were the different sections he offered on the foundation of mindfulness in the body. Mindfulness of the breath, mindfulness of the postures, clear comprehension, the repulsiveness of the body, the four elements, and the cemetery contemplations, or the death contemplations. These were all, in a sense, formal meditation practices, right? Like he was encouraging us to actually practice with these things, not just understand them intellectually, not just reflect on them or ponder them or discuss them, but to actually sit and practice with them. There's one more part of the sutta that I've left out, and that's the refrain. It's often overlooked, but like at the end of every section, this refrain is repeated in the whole sutta. It's actually repeated 13 times in the sutta. And I'm going to read it, but I just want to read what Bhikkhu Analayo says about it. The task of sati, or mindfulness, is to penetrate beyond the surface appearance of the object under observation. The task of sati is to penetrate beyond the surface appearance of the object under observation and to lay bare the characteristics it has with all conditioned phenomena. So the refrain as we get into it is encouraging us not just to tune into the breath and the direct experience, but also kind of to recognize a few things. So I'm going to read the sutta and then we'll discuss it. So in the body part, it says, thus he lives contemplating the body in the body internally, or he lives contemplating the body in the body externally, or he lives contemplating the body in the body internally and externally. He lives contemplating origination factors in the body, or he lives contemplating dissolution factors in the body, or he lives contemplating origination and dissolution factors in the body. Or his mindfulness is established with the thought, the body exists, only to the extent necessary just for knowledge and mindfulness, and he lives detached and clings to nothing in the world. Thus also a monk lives contemplating the body in the body. Alright, so that's a lot of info. I'm going to break it down into the way I understand it. The first section is internally and externally, right? Contemplating the body internally and externally, or both internally and externally. There are some teachers that I've sat with and that I've heard speak that teach internal and external as almost internal and external parts of the body. So external mindfulness would be like the skin touching the wind, right? That kind of the outside of our body. Whereas internal mindfulness would be the air going into our lungs. Most commentators agree that that's kind of an incorrect take of it, and I don't like to say that very often. People interpret these things differently, and I think we're talking about teachings that are thousands of years old, and we all could be wrong about what was intended by it. But the general consensus among scholars is that that's not what it means. What it means is to practice mindfulness of the body both internally with ourselves and mindfulness of others' bodies. So just using the example of the cemetery contemplations, we can reflect on the impermanent nature in that way of somebody we love, perhaps, to help us practice mindfulness externally. We can watch another person breathe, right? If you, without being, I don't know the correct word other than creepy, without being creepy about it, you can watch somebody else breathe. Even when my partner and I are lying in bed at night, I can feel the physical sensation of her breath. And the encouragement is that Bhikkhu Analayo makes, and that I've found useful, is to really do a bare noting practice, right? No judgment or commentary. Not like, oh, they're breathing in really short, I think they're anxious or something. Just noticing the breath of the other person, or noticing the posture of another person. Internally and externally. I think this can help us lead to not be so self-centered in our practice. It also can help us understand how our bodies and our minds and our words are impacting or interacting with the world around us, and kind of interdependent. And it can also, in a sense, lead to metta and connection. So with all of these, the encouragement is to practice them both internally and externally. Then there's origination and dissolution, as Tanjef translates it. Analayo in his book translates it as arising and passing away. This is basically impermanence, just noticing the impermanent nature of the experience in the body. You may have something like a chronic pain. I have a partially torn lat muscle right now that I hurt wakeboarding, and I've been surfing with it and stuff, so it's all inflamed and bothered. And it feels like it's not a chronic pain, I haven't had it for years, but I've had it, it's been there for a little while now, and it feels like it's always with me. We have such a tendency to label that as my side or my back hurts. But if you actually tune in, it's impermanent, it's changing, right? There's a coming and going, a strengthening and weakening, or maybe it's moving. So to notice when the pain, for example, arises, and to notice also when it passes. And not just know, intellectually, but to really know from experience. And then the last piece is this piece: to know that the body exists to the extent necessary just for knowledge and mindfulness. So recognizing our experience and everything only as much as we need, right? So not getting too caught up in associations or reactions and identifying with the body. Just kind of identifying this as a body as much as we need to be mindful of it. So we can notice that this is happening in the body or in the arm or in the chest or whatever it may be. But trying to steer clear a little bit of like our arm or my body. Trying to not get too wrapped up in identification with it. And this living detached and cling to nothing is a... Bhikkhu Analayo instructs us that this is not a period for reflection or intellectual reflection, right? We can reflect on our meditation experience outside of meditation, perhaps by journaling or discussing it with someone or a teacher. But during the actual meditation period, only using kind of the thinking mind just for enough knowledge to practice mindfulness and living detached. This is why so often teachers will use a noting practice, a kind of direct speech. So just noting in, out as we breathe. Or if you have a sensation in your arm, just noting arm. Not really getting all wrapped up in it, not allowing the mind to run with it in any shape, way, or form. Just experiencing it and leaving it be. So just to recap, we have these 4 foundations of mindfulness, or 4 establishments of mindfulness, the direct path to awakening. And the first one is mindfulness of the body. We have the breath, the postures, the clear comprehension, the reality or repulsiveness, the 4 elements, the cemetery contemplations. And then we have the refrain, which encourages us to look at it internally and externally, to notice the impermanent nature of it, and to really just focus on the direct experience. It's a lot of information, and that's just one of the 4 establishments of mindfulness. So what do we do to practice with this? I go through, if I'm, being transparent here, maybe once like every 2 years, I go through a period where maybe I'm not meditating as much, maybe every other day or something. And I go, I'm going to dive back into the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And I'm going to do like a day of mindfulness of the breath. And then I'm going to do a day of mindfulness of postures. And I do that. And what always happens is I find something interesting, right? I go to practice with mindfulness of the breath and I find something interesting there and I practice with that for however long. Or I do the cemetery contemplations and I find it beneficial and benefiting me, so I keep sitting with that. But all of this to say is it's just too much information for us to tackle all at once. It's a big teaching. It's a big sutta with a lot of teachings, and it's not meant to be tackled or mastered in a week, a month, or even a year. So give yourself space to investigate. You can find all of the meditations for these practices on Google or YouTube or however you find videos by searching like the cemetery contemplations meditation. I'll include some resources in the show notes. For me, the best way to really investigate the 4 foundations, and I know this isn't an option available to everyone, has been retreats and spending time at monasteries where you're spending a lot more time meditating and with a lot more instruction. So if you're able to do that, a mindfulness-based retreat that's based on the 4 foundations, I highly recommend it. My other suggestion is to investigate one at a time. If one of these jumped out to you, investigate it. Read about it, meditate with it, ask questions. I will answer any question that is sent my way at matthew@oneminddharma.com. I'm happy to have like a back and forth discussion about it. Ask another teacher if you have another teacher. But investigate one at a time and really kind of dive into it is my recommendation. We don't need to kind of bring, if these are new practices to you, you don't need to overwhelm yourself and bring all of them into your practice at once. You also don't need to be as theoretically rigid as I am, where it's like, I'm going to do this and then that and then that. I don't find that beneficial for myself. I do it, but I don't find it beneficial. Instead, see if there's one that you want to investigate or calls to you. Maybe there's one you really don't want to investigate, and maybe that's the one you need to. That's not for me to say. So to investigate which one to investigate, where to start with this mindfulness of the body. And remember that wherever you start, the calling here is to practice mindfulness of the body in a way that brings us closer to, as Analio said, to penetrate beyond the surface appearance of the object under observation, the body, and to lay bare the characteristics of conditioned phenomena. So the calling is to look at the body and breath in a way that helps us really know in our bones the three marks of existence: impermanence, not self, and dukkha. I think that's all I have for today. I encourage you to practice a little bit of mindfulness of the body, however you practice it, because we're going to come back with the second foundation of mindfulness, Vedana, which kind of we can work off the body with. And we'll do that next week. And then I'm going on vacation, so there'll be a week break, and we'll go into the other foundations. So again, if you want to work together, you can find me at themindfulcounselor.me or oneminddharma.com/coach. I have, I think, 2 or 3 openings right now, maybe 3. We meet for an hour. I have a few people I meet with, and we really kind of dive into suttas and dharma. I have a few people I meet with who we're really just working on building a meditation practice. And then I have most people I work with just bringing mindfulness to whatever stresses or anxieties or difficulties they're facing. And remember, you can visit oneminddharma.com/group for a free sitting group, and oneminddharma.com/6, the number 6, for the 6-week course. And if you want some of the resources, you can go to oneminddharma.com and /podcasts and find this episode. It'll have the links to the Satipattha book, the sutta that where I quoted it from. There's a great article from Wild Mind on how the 4 foundations are a dynamic process that I'm going to link in every single episode on these foundations, because I love that article. We have an article on One Mind Dharma that I link to, and then the Kulavadela Sutta, which is where I mentioned it's a question and answer session with the Buddha. And then again, I already mentioned, but any questions, you can email me at matthew@oneminddharma.com, or any thoughts about it or any clarification. I love talking Dharma, and look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.